welcome to this session on Chinese urbanization. In this session, we will be discussing urbanization in the context of one of the world's fastest developing economies. You've all been following the developments of the Chinese economy over the last decades, but I have to say that even for myself, having lived for 22 years now in China, I think that we are on the cusp of a new phase of this development. Something is happening, something new is happening, and I think that this is intimately tied to urbanization. China, we learned yesterday that urbanization is a global phenomenon, that cities all over the world are the same, but I think that every country faces unique challenges when it comes to urbanization because of its culture, its history, its political environment, and its socio-economic development. And China, as you all know, is slated to become the world's largest economy in the next few years. But in order to do so, China also as a country faces some challenges. It needs to transform its economy to become more sustainable, to become more innovative. China needs to build global corporations that can compete on the world stage. We have a lot of local issues and challenges, such as creating a social safety net for people. And in this session, what we're going to try to do is to look quite specifically at a few questions. First of all, what do Chinese citizens want and expect from their cities and the leadership of those cities? And how is that going to change going forward? How will urbanization change China? Economically, socially, politically, and culturally? I think this is a very, very interesting question. And of course, in line with the topic of this whole summit, what are some of the challenges and opportunities, not just for China as a country, but also for other countries around the world and for multinational corporations as a result of these developments? For those of you who are not used to listening to simultaneous translation devices, a tip is that since we're going to be changing rapidly between Chinese and English, you don't take them off your head when you're not listening. You move them forward in front of your ears so you don't listen to them, but then you can rapidly just put them back. So that's going to hopefully be a little bit easier. So next, or to answer our first question on what Chinese people are thinking about their cities, I'd like to introduce somebody who's got his finger on the pulse of China in more than one way. Not only is he a very, very successful local entrepreneur who's founded one of China's leading research companies, Horizon Research, but he's also a famous TV host that has his own weekly programs on China Business Network. So it's a great pleasure and honor to introduce my old friend and colleague, Victor Yuan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So nice to share some of my working experience on how to develop some new innovative models to help the Chinese government to have some alternative, it's a different thinking way to try to manage the city problem. When we talk about Chinese model, people are used to think about in China, including the cities, the party and the government is highly dominated in any issues and policies. So basically, we are used to the top-down way to handle everything. But the problem is that now we have a more and more policy dilemma, and social problems is basically whatever you choose, you always face some public pressure and a public challenge to government policy. So in that sense, the current the Chinese administration, including the central government and also the municipal, the city government would like to listen to more public voice and try to balance the needs from the general public and also the needs from the leadership. So here I will try to share more how the city leadership is trying to understand more information from general public. And you don't need to take too much about this detailed figures, but we are doing a lot to try to understand what are the people's concern and try to provide the possible information for the decision makers in the city level when they consider about the annual agenda and a 5-year plan, and to see what kind of things people want the government leaders to pay more attention to. This is like we do every year. We look at what are the people's most concerned about, and we look at the inflation, the working unemployment problem, and nowadays the food safety is a big issue. So we have the national survey and research to try to present all those problems detailedly. But for a specific city, the different city with a different problem. And we also look at deeply about what kind of things would be testify the social conflict and the social conditions. For example, there's a big problem about the house relocation. And if you get a chance to visit China, it's China like a big construction site. People is construct the new buildings and different projects everywhere. But first you needed to, you demolish the original, the buildings, the older buildings, and then you get a space to build up the new ones. The ownership of land in China basically belong to the government, belong to the state, and also belong to so-called collective ownership. So legally, government got a chance to get this land, but there are already so many people there. So how get it, and at what kind of price, and how to negotiate with people? So in many cities, the relocation is the tough, and sometimes it's an issue at the top to stimulate people will criticize and sometimes protest the government actions. And for the other things like crime control, and sometimes about the job offering, all those issues possibly would let the people protest the government policy. Actually, if you read the government report, mainly you see so many good news from there. But if you listen more voice from the general public, you get so many criticism and so many angry from there. But so many problems. But what are those questions or issues you should take it as a priority, and to give the resource more at first or at a priority. And of course, government originally have their own way how to have the internal decision-making process to have this agenda. But nowadays, if we revise the thinking way, and we look at from the people's angle, the general people's angle, or from the different interest group, what are those issues you must put at priority? So that is why we help some municipal government to try to have this so-called short list. The short list means they have so many different problems. This is a long list. And then if you consider about those people or different interests from the general public, and they will put it at this different importance, then you have those short list, and who would be put at first. If for the government leaders, they will have those different information, some from the general public, some from the special interest group, sometimes from the top leadership. So they will try to balance the agenda. Of course, we don't have that kind of a general election. So mayors will not fully consider about what people want. But at least we try to balance the possible agenda and a combine of some weights from the general public angle. So when I talk about the social innovation, I think the implication, the meaning is a little bit different with the social innovation we talk about here in France, in the European countries, or United States. Because here more or less is about if we should handle those social issues and for the social problems. Sometimes you cannot only use the government resource to solve this problem. You need to mobilize some public resource and some social resource and to solve this problem. But in China, when we talk about a public service, that basically means government service. We don't have a very strong NGO sector, And sometimes we don't have a very strong outsourcing model, the outsourcing some public tasks to the business sector to handle things efficiently. So here, when I talk about social innovation, it's a possible model that how to stimulate and develop the more social energy and a social potentiality to handle this more and more social conflicts and social contradictions. And businessly here there are some key things. First, we must develop more NGOs. And second, we needed to build up, construct a new mechanism to listen to what the people want. And also, we need to reform the sector of professional service and original social organizations such as like work union and women federation and youth legals, and use a different way and more or less to try to make up some gap between the government service and the public needs. If among all those measures, there's one measure that's very important. It's about how to give a bigger space for NGO development, which is now is already started. And basically, this government have a relatively relaxed policies that the more NGOs they can have registration and without the government, so-called government leadership. And also, many places, the local government start the so-called entrepreneurship program. And basically, government have its foundations and allow to the citizen, if they want to have the social entrepreneurship program, they can apply for a fund and support the sponsorship from this government background philanthropical foundations. And for that reasons, in places like Shanghai, Shenzhen, Shunde, and Chengdu, capital of the Sichuan, there's more and more new NGOs rising up. And also there are many NGOs, so-called mother NGOs, and basically you try to incubate and help more NGO programs rise up. It's also like my Black Apple is one of I initiate the NGOs to help more young people to involve in this social education. So my final PPT shows ways is in Shunde, one of the pioneering social innovation cities in Guangdong. And here we basically summarized 26 actions, how to conduct a social innovation in that city, how to open the step-by-step open space for the NGO incubation and NGO development, and how to build up the mechanisms the government have a dialogue and interaction mechanism between the government and the general public, and also how to let the government's the power scope will be small and give a more outsourcing resource to the business sector and a professional service sector. So this is like a roadmap. And from the A to Z, 26 actions will be done in the coming 3 years. And all those things is not a big step. It's a move up like from current situation to a new political system. But it's basically try to set up some good social foundations and open a better space for further political reformation. Thank you.
Very, very interesting, Victor. Please hang on for a second. We'll take questions also from the audience during the session. So if any of you have questions, you can raise your hands during the procedures for any speaker. Victor, just one question immediately on your presentation here. You're doing market research for local governments. Is that correct? This is basically what you're
Policy research.
Policy research, yeah. So, I mean, you propose some very concrete things that need to change going forward into China's development.
Yes.
How much of that needs political reform? That's a very hot topic being discussed in China today, and how much can actually fit into the existing structures of local government?
Okay. I think I kind of found a very micro angle to give the example how to make it works. People already know in China we have the village election, and basically allow the people living in the villages, they can vote for the head of the village. But problem is that usually only the original village heads, they will be attend the election and they will be elected. The reason is that there is not new public service, public space, and public action there. So we don't have the new public figures. And so the first step would encourage the people, young people, and the new people would be happy to provide a service and develop the philanthropic organization or action or programs in a villager. And then
okay. So this is one concrete
new action.
New action
and
to allow
those people will become a new public figure. Right. And in the future, in 3 or 4 years, there will be the candidates to compete with original.
Do you see that happening today?
Yes.
Okay. We have one question from the floor.
My question is that what we have the perception is that in the China, the things are mainly under control of the state or the government. As you said that the NGOs has played a vital role regarding all these things. So what's the method of getting the permission from the government to the NGOs, and how significant a role they played in all these things, what you said?
So how significant are NGOs already today, and is it easy to get permission today? Short answer.
I think the two things. One thing is the government, whatever the process will be under control. Second, we do see they give the space and have some experimental locations in different cities. And then they try to assess the result, if it would be give a help to society and also at the same time under control.
So there is space for experimentation, but we still need more. I think that's Victor's message. Very good. I would like now to introduce our second speaker. This is a man who, even though it doesn't maybe show on the exterior, he's actually a third-generation Shanghainese. His family has lived in Shanghai for 3 generations, and he's taken a deep interest in urbanization. I think few companies have done more to understand the urbanization process in China than McKinsey & Company. So it's a great honor for me to introduce to all of you Jonathan Woetzel.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Johan. I'm going to need to borrow that clicker again. And I enjoy being on the stage, so once was clearly not enough. Today, though, I wear 2 hats. One is as McKinsey & Company. The other, as you can see, the Urban China Initiative, which is an effort to bring the multidisciplinary approach to the challenge of cities. As we know, cities is not solely an economic challenge, but a social and an environmental one. And we at McKinsey are clearly economic consultants. So we recognize that this conversation needs more people at the party. And so congratulations to the New City Summit for bringing all of you to this table. In the next 6 minutes, I think I have left, I will endeavor to paint a broad picture of what we see going on in China, and why all of your talents are needed for a sustainable, harmonious city of the future. So, let's see. Oh, there we go. China's urbanization is nothing short of spectacular, but so is its economic development. This chart simply says that since the last 15 years, the single biggest change in the human condition has happened. Disposable income per capita up 3 times, more than 350 million people lifted out of poverty, more than 250 cities tripling their GDP per capita. I mean, it is a staggering change, and it is a change, an experiment that has not been written about before in books, to quote a famous Chinese leader. So this is something that is truly historic. I think pictures tell it better than words. This is Shenzhen 35 years ago. I was there. This is pretty much what it looked like. This is the same place today. And that, of course, is not an isolated instance. One could go around the country and have done see that time-lapse photography pretty much anywhere there's a major urban center. That's not the only thing that's exciting about this, because it's not just an economic change, it's a fundamental change of reality. The dots here are countries, so this is not just a China phenomenon, it's a global one. And what we see is the relationship between urbanization and inequality. So why are all these people coming to cities? Essentially to reinvent themselves, to have a better life. Here I've chosen gender inequality. It could have been any measure. So we're saying that in the city, women have a chance to be represented, to have more education, to get better jobs, because they do not have to live within 4,000 years of agrarian bondage. And that is what the city is. The city is an opportunity. And I really recommend to all those who are interested this book, Factory Girls. It gives you a very ground level perspective of what's going on in the factory. Why are people, girls in this case, coming off the lands and going to the factories? What is their life like, and what does that mean for the future? Because it truly is, in this case, an experiment that was not written about in books. Now we're starting to see a few books, so this is a good one. Going forward, these trends are long-term in nature. They're playing out. I mentioned earlier today, 1.5% of the population, give or take, every year, urbanizing, heading towards the urban billion. And again, the numbers are staggering. Over 200 cities of over 1 million urban population. There are only 35 of those in Europe today. Over 30 of over 5 million urban population. 40% of those large, almost mega cities will be in China. So again, just truly staggering numbers. It's important to recognize that while those mega cities are going to be very exciting, I mean, there are going to be 8 of them over 10 million, which will account for almost a quarter of the GDP, it's actually the mid-sized cities that are going to be the driver of growth. And so over 100 of these, 1.5 million on up, only in China would we say 1.5 million population is a mid-sized city. But those will be 34% of the GDP. So really what we're seeing is the formation of clusters. And each of these clusters is the size of a fair-sized European country. They have on the order of 20 to 50 cities, 50 to 80 million population. They're organized around a hub. There are quite a lot of satellites. Usually, as you can see, around water, no city. I think that is what we're seeing. We're seeing the crystallization of a United States of China, or a union of China of some sort. It's a fascinating development, and one which hasn't really been played out, but that's what we see on the ground. Now, one big change is migration. In the last 15 years, a large portion of how China's cities were created was organic, or more simply put, you went to sleep as a rural resident and you woke up as an urban one. Because the city had decided to redraw its boundaries. Migration, actually picking up and moving, was only about 1/3 of the growth in the urban population. Looking forward, that's being reversed. So migrants, people who have actually physically picked up and moved, will become almost 2/3 of the increase in population. And that creates a fundamental challenge, because now we're not allowed to sort of stay where we were before and see the city grow around us. Now, actually, we have to move. And when we move, we have to create new networks. We have to create new social structures to support us. So this does mean that the next wave of urbanization is that much more challenging. Plus, we have the challenges that come with cities themselves. We have unemployment pressures. Those are Chinese graduates lining up for jobs after graduation. We have the lack of a social system. Over 50% of healthcare in China is privately paid. In other words, if you get sick, you pay for it. We have the view outside my window in Shanghai on a bad day, congestion and so forth. And that picture on the upper right, that was Shenzhen in 1980-something. This is Shenzhen in 1990-something, and this is Shenzhen today. So Shenzhen's a bit of an extreme example, but we are to some extent running out of land. So there are these challenges. If we compare China to the rest of the world, what we see is that China has done a great job on the economic side. As we look at any ranking, global competitive indexes, GDP per capita, it's all going up. More challenged on the environmental side, and also importantly on the social side. So Gini coefficient in China today, roughly where the US is, and going in the wrong direction. So this is clearly there's a rebalancing as the model has now started to create some real stress, which is, I think, interesting as we look at the 12th five-year plan. this is what it says. It says that economic development was the focus of the past. Now we need to rebalance that with resource and environmental management and urbanization and social well-being, aided by continuous governance reform. And that is the challenge of governance. I think we'll hear later on today about how that model needs to change. I would only say for these things are not contradictory, that people are looking for a win-win-win answer. And that the challenge for all of us in the room is to apply our talents along those three dimensions together. Central and local governments have a critical role. How is this going to happen? We've talked a bit about decentralization before in the UK context. I think the China one is, of course, vastly different. However, there are some interesting parallels. There is no Wizard of Oz in China. There's nobody standing behind the curtain there who's going to wave a magic wand and make it all better. That said, the central government does play an important role to define the shape and the principles, the clusters, if you will, the major infrastructure decisions. It is, however, up to the local governments to implement, to drive policy innovations. And that is, I think, the real opportunity for those who are outside of China to participate, because those local governments very much look for examples, best practices, opportunities to experiment. And in their implementation, hopefully, comes the opportunity to create a truly sustainable revolution as that replicates across China. So, I close with Deng Xiaoping. Some people in rural areas and cities should be allowed to get rich before others. When some areas and people become rich, they are encouraged to help poor areas and people get rich, so that all the people in the country will ultimately become rich and prosperous. Notice how many times he says rich. But it's also, people tend to focus on the first part of this, not the last part. We've gone through the first part. Some areas have become rich. Now it's the challenge is to extend that to the whole country so that China, once again, becomes a rich and a prosperous country.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Very, very interesting. Okay, I'm losing part of my equipment here, but apart from that, we're doing good. This is a fascinating macro overview. I mean, what is different about this picture in China, and what you would see in other similar developing countries? Sure. Are there specific challenges for China?
Well, I mean, the first is the obvious, that in China it's happening somewhat later and somewhat bigger and somewhat faster than it has happened before. So that's the first. And I think at some level scale matters, because the solutions that are developed at this scale ultimately are global ones, in a sense that we are not going to, if China does not come up with an electric vehicle model, it will be unlikely the world has electric vehicles. And so the solutions that China adopts ultimately make a difference. I think the other part of it is simply the context that China is very much in control of its urbanization to the extent anyone can be. And there are just two very, very quick factors. China had one of the world's most equal land reform. So there had been at least a rural safety net, and China has a one-child policy. So with population control, the challenge, the impetus to push people off the land isn't there. Now they're being pulled.
So what you're saying is that it's more well-planned than in many other places.
They have the opportunity, I would say, to plan it better.
Okay, we'll get into that in a moment. We have a question from the floor.
Thank you, Brent Totter, and I'm a urbanism consultant in Canada and until recently chief planner for Vancouver. And I'm intrigued by the comments about China becoming rich and increasingly adopting a North American definition of rich, or even the middle class. And part of that is owning a car or more than one. And we've talked a lot about technology in this summit, but we haven't talked about the abandoning of old technology. And the most striking example is China's abandoning of the bicycle.
Let me get back to that question in the Q&A after the sessions. We're going to talk specifically about cars and bicycles then.
Wonderful.
Okay, because I think this is a very, very hot topic. Do we have any more questions from the floor? If not, then you've now heard sort of the macro view. I'd now like to take you very close to Chinese reality, to a micro view, if you will, of a mid-sized or even small-sized Chinese city, Huangshi. We have with us today here Mayor Xie, who is responsible for this city. He's going to talk to us about how he solves a very specific problem, which is highly intractable, and which is housing. So, very welcome, Mr. Xie. And we're expecting lots of questions from the floor because we have a unique panel here today. You're not going to meet these guys in many other places together. So get ready for questions.
非常高兴啊，能有机会在这个新城市论坛啊做一个发言。正像刚才大龙先生说的，前面2位嘉宾都说的呢是关于中国城市化的宏观层面的一些具体问题。我的这个发言呢，大家可以把它理解成为一个具体的案例。什么案例呢？就是中国政府在解决城市化过程中的住房问题的一个具体的一个案例。大家都知道呢，这个城市啊是人类文明的结晶。今天全球的城市人口呢是大概36个亿。中国呢，经过30多年的快速发展呢，城市人口啊从1.7亿，30年前的1.7亿，发展到今天的7亿人口。所以这个量是非常快的，时间和数量都是非常快的。在这个城市化过程中呢，有一个世界性的难题，就是怎么解决住房问题。尤其在这个快速发展的中国中，这个问题呢显得特别的突出。我们呢在黄石呢是一个中国的一个中等城市，在保障城市化过程中的住房问题啊，我们做了一些探索。所以今天呢，跟大家做个交流。首先呢，我先介绍一下黄石。黄石呢是在中国的中部，湖北省。人口呢260万，面积呢是4600平方公里，城区人口呢70万人。黄石呢是中国中部的一个重要的工业原材料城市。同时呢，也是一个资源枯竭型城市。因为它这个长期的这个资源挖掘啊，在上个世纪90年代，工矿企业大量倒闭，也出现了很多的棚户区，就是相当于有的国家说的贫民窟。这是当时的一幅动画片。我们当时统计这个棚户区啊，一共有164片，200万平方米，涉及户口呢大概是1万2千户，其中80%是中低收入的群体。这是上个世纪90年代的一个图片。这是一个层面。第二个层面呢，在随着工业化和城镇化的发展啊，大量的这个新生人口，农村向城市转移的人口，和新就业的毕业的大学生，以及流动人口向城市聚集。这2块叠加起来，对这个城市化中的住房问题啊，尤其对政府都提出了新的要求。上个世纪从这个上个世纪开始，中国政府呢就是一直在加大解决这个问题的力度。从黄石讲呢，我们也一直在按照中央政府的要求在努力。现在看的这个幻灯片呢，是我们做的这个现在叫政府倡导下的一个用市场机制来解决公共租赁住房的一个问题。这个模式呢，现在我们还正在运行，现在是中间的一个阶段性的过程，当然已经有一些成果了。通过我们这几年的努力吧，从本世纪以来，我们现在建设和收集的公共租赁住房35000套，面积呢大概有160万平方米，应该说极大的缓解了这个整个城区的这个在城市化过程中的一个住房租赁问题。这是一个模型，这个小区呢叫金广厦，面积很大，现在还没有完工，在今年年底可以入住。这是一个，所以今天我重点要介绍什么呢？介绍就是从黄石市政府来说，怎么解决公共租赁住房问题。我们的做法呢，大概有6条。我一条一条来啊。第一点就是我们把所有的政府投资的和国有的闲置的这些住房全统一起来， 统一成一个什么？统一一个公共租赁住房。这个住房体系覆盖整个市区内的，我这个辖区内的所有需要保障的居民，全覆盖。就两层意思，一个是把这个住房，包括我们现在有公共租赁住房，有经济适用房，有保障房，所有的住房这种政府投资带有一定扶持性质的住房，全部整合到公共租赁住房这个体系中来。同时呢，所有暂时买不起房屋的，但是又有住房需求的这些居民，全部纳入到我这个城市的保障体系中来。在这个体系和规划下呢，我们将来的正在做的今后5年的规划，我们还需要新建45000套保障住房，面积达到240万平方米。这个呢，一共分为46个子项目，投资额也非常大，59亿人民币。任务非常艰巨，我们感觉任务非常艰巨。这是第一点做法。第二个呢，就是这个钱怎么建。第一个是我讲的是这个保障的对象，第二呢，就讲的这个保障房怎么建设和管理。为了这个加快这个保障房的建设和管理，我们建立了一个国有控股的公司，这个公司是非盈利性的，在黄石来讲就叫做众邦房屋投资有限公司。所有黄石市的这个公共租赁住房全部由这家公司来投资和建设管理。它同时也是一个融资平台，它可以向这个国家政策性银行、商业银行、企业包括个人筹集资金。这个公司发展速度很快。OK， 这是第二。第三呢，就是这个公共租赁住房的分配的问题。我们这边呢，现在这个分配呢，主要是采用这样的方式：一个是租金呢采用市场化，第二呢，补贴呢分类补贴，租金和补贴分类管理。具体来讲就是这样，由众邦公司呢委托一个中介机构，对整个城区内的公共租赁住房，根据它的地段、位置，参照市场价格确定一个租金价格，由众邦公司根据这个价格出租给承租人，同时他确定这个价格呢，每2年调整一次。第二呢，在这个同时，由我们这个市的住房保障中心代表政府对这个承租人进行住房的补贴。这个补贴呢是有标准的，这标准呢每1年审核和调整一次，并且向全社会公示。这是第二点做法。第三点做法，我加快速度啊。第三个做法呢，就是这个在土地供应上保证这个公共租赁住房的它的成本和管理。这主要是2方面，因为第一个是大家都知道，中国的这个房地产的价格和土地的成本啊上升很快，在这种背景下，由黄石市政府以市政府的名义啊，出让6000亩较低的价格出让给众邦公司，支持它的发展。第二呢，所有在黄石境内的棚户区改造的土地、腾退的土地，都交给众邦公司，由它来开发和收益，这样呢来保证这个公共租赁住房的成本是比较合适的。这是第五。第五呢，就是这个我们探索了一个就是公共租赁住房产权上的租和售是同时进行的一个产权模式。具体来讲呢，就是什么呢？这个承租人他可以根据他的意愿，分步骤的购买他租赁的房子，最终呢达到他拥有整个房屋的产权。这样呢，来加速整个公共租赁住房的资金的回流。这是第五。第六呢，是我们建立了一套信息化管理系统，基于诚信的，无论对房屋的管理系统和这个承租人的这个管理系统是合一的，保证它的公正和透明。这个呢，就是我讲的这个我们的具体做法。大家可能听起来觉得很简单，但做的过程中啊，因为这个非常繁琐，因为时间的关系呢，我只能给大家介绍这么多。反正最后我们黄石市政府的终极目标， 就是要保障我黄石境内的所有的困难群体的住房问题。在解决这些问题的前提下，来实现了黄石达到5个城市的目的。一个城市就是现代产业城，因为我刚刚前面介绍了，这个黄石啊是一个资源枯竭型城市，它现在面临一个产业的转移，产业结构的变化，现代产业城。第二呢，就是生态宜居城。第三呢，它是一个创新型的一个城市，我们希望它一个创新，它在发展，它的变化。第四呢，它是一个和谐幸福的城市，同时呢，它也是一个因为矿业文化不断发展的一个城市。要做到这一点呢，很不容易。我们呢会按照这个目标，按照这个方向继续的努力。同时呢，也欢迎大家呢在方便的时候到黄石啊考察和旅游。谢谢大家。
非常感谢谢市长。刚才您说的这个，实际上这个过程不是特别容易的。那到底最大的挑战是什么？因为看上去是很简单的，你说的。
其实有2个挑战。我觉得一个呢，就是这个，首先是数量，因为中国现在面临城镇化的这个人口啊，可能在其他国家，都除了可能我说已经完成城市化的国家中，可能没有碰到过的，或者工业化的过程中，就这么大量的人口，这是一个问题。第二呢，就是这个速度，这个以这么快的速度进行工业化和城市化，这可能在世界上也是少见的。这些问题要迅速的解决。你没有时间等待，同时也这么大量的人口都要照顾到，这也是一个很难的问题。
OK，
主要跟这2个问题。
非常感谢。So speed and scale of urbanization, just like Jonathan was pointing out. Thank you very much. We've now seen some of the specific challenges. We've seen a little bit of the macro environment. We now have a man who's devoted a lot of his time to sustainable architecture. He's now the founder and president of IContinuum Group. And James, you're going to talk to us about a smarter way of planning cities and transportation. Welcome to James Lee.
We've just heard Mayor Xiao talk about the challenges of urbanization in his city, a small to medium-sized city. And that problem is ubiquitous in China, as we know. China's scale and density of urbanization is its distinctive characteristic. The question that we pose to ourselves in our current research in transit synergized development is how do we leverage that large-scale, high-density development mode into a model of sustainable development for China? And for this research, I have to thank Jonathan Woetzel for his 2008 study on the urban China billion, which projected that by the year 2025, there will be up to 170 cities in China with mass transit systems. Now, consider that today in the world, excluding China, there's about 135 such cities. This is an astounding projection. And we took that message very clearly. China's urbanization will be transit-oriented. So we looked at that as an opportunity, as a challenge. And our model, the Transit Synergized Development, TSD, lies at the intersection of urban planning, transit planning, and energy planning. We take a district of 1 square kilometer around a major transit station, and we define a smart energy district around it. In analyzing this model, we assumed an FAR of 3.0, and we did some analysis on what if we provided a single energy plant, a smart energy hub, we call it, to supply the heating, cooling, and perhaps even the electricity for this area. And we found that we can save up to 40% of the energy through economy of scale, the issue that Mr. Jeffrey West talked about yesterday, but also through additional technologies that we can now economically and additively layer onto this platform, this singular energy hub. On top of that, we add a smart microgrid, and we mandate smart green buildings in this very strategic node of the city. All of these nodes that are planned today around mass transit stations have a distinctive characteristic, which is exemplified by a small city that we studied in the Jiangsu province, just west of Shanghai. And here we see that we are planning 2 subway lines, one running east-west, one running north-south, and 2 BRT lines, bus rapid transit lines, again, one north-south. And we looked at the energy around, along the path and around these, particularly the subway nodes. And we find that today's planning in China understands transit-oriented development. So we intentionally provide high-density development around transit nodes to facilitate access and mobility. So this is already occurring in China. And what we do is we take advantage of that. We leverage the density and the scale of these developments. And we find that they are prime candidates for district energy. When we have a concentration of commercial buildings, hotels, offices, retail centers, shopping malls, these are high-intensity energy users. And those are very constant uses throughout the day, and they are just prime candidates for a centralized solution. So through that, we gain capital cost savings as well as operating cost savings that amount to the some 40%, as we talked about. In addition, when we plan out strategic locations within the transit network, we find that these create their own network of energy sources. China today is pushing for distributed energy generation, meaning they are looking for a means to diversify the energy and electricity production, in particular from coal plants, mainly located in the north and the west, to locations closer to the use centers. So this trend requires the more intensive use of gas engines, generators, as well as renewable sources. So China is shifting towards a low-carbon regime. And our model looks at that and takes that as an opportunity to strategically locate gas-fired energy plants within the highest density centers. And the energy hubs is simply the single location to supply the entire district. That provides the core element of the smart energy infrastructure. The other elements include a microgrid and smart buildings and what we call an informed and smart end user. If you look at this diagram, this infrastructure essentially provides an integrated way to look at energy supply at the lower right-hand corner, energy distribution, energy demand, and finally the end user. So this is an integrated model to tie together the entire supply chain of energy. And as China moves towards a renewable energy regime and moves towards the electrical car industry, these can be integrated into the model for additional synergies. Implementing such a model requires a coordinated planning and a coordinated process that begins at the city master planning level through regulatory controls, technical design, and energy management, and most particularly having a financial model that involves both the private and the public sector. Finally, this is a simple diagram of the process as well as the key stakeholders that have to be involved in such a complex undertaking as a new energy infrastructure. And we hope that through this model, we can provide an integrated model for to solve certainly a subset of China's urbanization, but one that with distinct Chinese characteristics. Thank you.
Fascinating. A fabulous example of the kind of unique opportunities that we have in China, because so many things are starting from scratch in this rapid urbanization. Exactly. So I mean, but China is an intensely planned society. You as an innovator, are people receptive to this kind of new thinking? Can you get into those plans and change them? What do you see as the future there?
I think there's a distinct level of interest whenever we present this model to city leaders, and I'm happy to report that we will be talking to a city with exactly such a project at the beginning stage, at the outset. And these are the kind of projects that have to be initiated very early on in the planning process to integrate with the infrastructure development. So we are seeing very receptive. The challenge, of course, is this requires an integrated development model, which is not how it's currently practiced. We're going to involve all the utilities, all the departments. So that will be a challenge, yes.
Fantastic. Well, let's hope for that. And let's also now look at, as we've seen all of these various perspectives, I thought it would be appropriate for us to have a government expert who has spent a lot of time dealing with financing, also with the use of land in China. Mr. Xiao Jincheng, Deputy Head of the Land Economy and Regional Research Bureau of the National Development and Reform Commission. Welcome, Mr. Xiao. 欢迎。
大家下午好，非常高兴呢，在这里给大家交流中国的城市化战略问题。那么，中国的城市化战略，开始于2000年。那么在此之前呢，实际上中国一直推行的是抑制城市化的一个战略。那么所谓城市化呢，就是把农村人口转移到城市。那么这样一个过程，确实不仅对中国有重大影响，对世界也会有重大影响。那么我们说城市化的这个内涵或者内容，就是要把符合落户条件的农业转移人口逐步转为城市居民，作为推进城市化的重要任务。这个农业转移人口呢，在中国被称为农民工，也就是说具有农民身份的工厂的工人。那么中国的城市化战略就是要坚持因地制宜，分步推进，把有稳定劳动关系的并在城市居住一定年限的农民工及其家属逐步转为城镇居民，要走有中国特色的城市化道路。那么什么是有中国特色的城市化道路呢？就是要以农民工为主体，以城市群为主要载体，大中小城市和小城镇并举，积极稳妥地推进城市化。那么世界的城市化过程，有的国家是以大城市为主体，有的呢是以小城市为主体。那么中国呢，因为这个城市化的任务很重，而且要在时间很短的时间内要推进这个城市化进程，所以呢，它就采取的是大中小城市共同推进的这种一个道路。那么为什么要推进城市化？那么城市化对于中国有什么意义？那么我认为有下述3条。第一条就是有利于统筹城乡发展。了解中国的人都知道，中国的城市经济比较发达，而农村比较落后。那么第2条呢，是有利于促进区域协调发展。 那么中国幅员面积很大，那么东部、中部、西部区域发展的差距很大。那么呢，很多的农民工都是来自于西部的落后地区，或者很多都是低收入者。那么他到东部沿海地区打工，或者到那儿去工作，那么这样推进城市化，就有利于落后地区的这个发展水平提高。第三个是有利于建立扩大消费需求的长效机制。这个农村的消费水平很低的，因为它收入比较低。那么到了城市，会提高它的收入，同时也会提高它的消费水平，将扩大这个消费需求。所以呢，这个消费需求的扩大对于这个经济发展呢是非常有利的。那么这个对于农村来讲，那么有几个数据我可以跟大家报告。现在中国农业占 GDP 的比重只有10.1%，但是呢，农村农业劳动力呢，现在占的比重有36.7%，有1/3的劳动力是在从事农业。那么农村的人口现在还有一半以上，准确的数据就是50.32%，就是2011年的数据，刚刚这个下降到50%以下，也就是城市化水平刚刚突破50%。那么到2030年，中国的城市化的目标，就是再过20年，这个城市化目标呢要超过70%，也就是说70%的人要居住在城市和城镇。那么中国的城市人口将会超过10亿，这个数字非常的庞大。也就是说，在这20年时间，中国要把农村人口转移到城市要3亿多，3亿以上要转移到城市。我觉得这是一个非常的繁重的任务，那么对中国政府将形成很大的压力。但是呢，这同时也是中国的一个机遇。那么在这个过程中，中国的城市建设要加快，中国的消费水平要提高，消费需求要扩大。我想在中国的城市化将为全世界带来难得的机遇。那么这么多的农村人口转移到哪里？也就是到哪个城市去？到大城市去，还是到中等城市去，还是到小城镇去？这实际上中国讨论了很长时间，直到现在还在探索。那么“12五”规划，中国的“12五”规划明确了，要以大城市为依托，以中小城市为重点，逐步形成辐射作用大的城市群。我这个好像是没把这个促进大中小城市和小城镇协调发展。我这个怎么动不了啊？好。要科学规划城市群内的各个城市的功能定位和产业布局，缓解特大城市的压力，强化中小城市的产业功能，增强小城镇公共服务和居住功能，推进大中小城市一体化建设和网络化发展。那么也就是说，中国要发展这个一批的城市群。那么这个城市群呢，就是要有大城市，有中等城市，有小城镇，这些城市呢要协调发展，而且呢这些城市呢都在这个区域范围内比较密集的分布。1分钟。好。那么城市群呢，实际上是这个在中国已经形成了10大城市群。这10大城市群都分布在东部和中部地区。那么为什么会这样分布？ 这和中国的地形地貌是有关系的。这是中国的城市群。那么中国的城市群是个什么情况？实际上，现在10大城市群占国土面积的11%，那么承载的人口是1/3以上，那么它创造的 GDP 已经接近2/3。所以呢，中国的城市群对中国的经济发展起到一个重要的支撑作用。那么未来还有6个新的城市群将要出现，所以这些城市群呢，将是未来的一个中国城市化的一个主要的载体。也就是说，中国的农村人口大部分会进入到这个城市群里来。好，谢谢大家。
非常感谢肖所长。So as we see, these urban clusters are really going to, it's part of the government's planning also, what Jonathan was talking about just now with urban clusters of the size of European countries, basically. We now have a few minutes left of our session. We have about 15 minutes. I'd like to open up the floor in a moment, so if you have questions, please raise your hand. We'll have the microphones out in just a second. But I also have some questions for this panel that I'd like to dig into a little bit more deeply. First of all, we've been talking about the planning. 我们谈的这个就是整个这个规划和我们现在所面临的挑战。But what are the contradictions? What are the inherent contradictions, conflicts of interests, as we do this massive urbanization? I mean, there has to be different wills and forces here. And what are your points of view on that? Very short, just brief statements, but what do you see as the main contradictions? 就是大家看这个这么迅速的城市化的这个社会矛盾，最大的、最突出的地方会是在什么地方？
Oh, just to point out one thing. I think there are so many projects with the government plan, the government the goal set there, but the goal never be really realized effectively. I mean, usually some indicators would be realized very quickly, much sooner than the government planned.
Yeah, fine.
The reason is that.
But Victor, there are certainly contradictions. For example, one thing that's debated a lot inside China now is when you're doing this rapid urbanization, you have to move people from one place to another, and there are lots of protests around this. Are there such conflicts of interest, and what other conflicts of interest are there?
Yeah, I think the one thing is that the government cannot estimate enough about what happened. They cannot really understand what happened on the ground.
Okay.
The second thing is that there are so many local level government officials, they report good news but not report bad news. So that is why always there are some contracts there, but it cannot always be covered.
Right, but these are problems, challenges.
Yes.
What I'm looking for are there actually conflicts of interest? 就是有没有利益冲突？
Of course, now we talk a lot about 国进民退. It means when I look at what happened in Huangshi, when they consider about the so-called the rent, the house, the public house, and they will set up a new stand-owned, government-owned company. We're doing that. There are more and more government-owned companies will be set up, which is quite a contrast to the early time of a reformation process.
Okay, so private enterprise, state-owned enterprise is one such conflict. Do we have any other conflicts from the panel?
我来，可以讲，可以讲，你不需要这个。啊？哦，对，这个好，这个我刚才一再的提到农民工，这个农民工的概念很奇特，也就是说具有农民身份的工厂的工人，当然工厂大部分都在城市。那现在中国的农民工数量已经有2亿4千万，但是呢，他没有享受到城市的福利， 它没有完善的社会保障体系，那么所以呢，它的身份没有解决，也就是说，它没有城市居民的身份。那么要解决这个身份问题，表面上是一个证件证书，但实际上是包含了很多的福利和保障。
所以这个是市民。
这个福利和保障实际上是一个巨额的数值。
所以这个是市民和农村人口的一个
市民和
存在
农民
的矛盾。
这个形成一个两个利益集团。第二个，东部的这个人口经济收入比较高，而西部的收入比较低。他到东部去要解决他的户口问题，那么东部人和他的利益又是一个冲突。
Okay, very interesting. Jonathan, you have spent a lot of time with migrant workers, so I'm sure you agree to this. But do you see any other inherent conflicts of interest in this development?
Well, I mean, when China started its reforms 25 years ago, I don't think we really had interest groups. I think everybody more or less recognized that a socialist market economy, whatever that meant, was going to be the answer. And we were all sort of pushing for that. Now, 25 years later, clearly some people have made more money than others, and they would like to hang on to it. And that, I think, is a challenge when you have new people entering the system. So there is a conflict of interest between those who control the resource allocation mechanism and where money comes from and goes to, and those who would like to get an opportunity to enter the stream of commerce. That's, I think, and I'll just add one last thing. I actually think this is somewhat generational. I think there is a challenge. It's not necessarily a contradiction, but certainly a challenge to balance the interests of today's generation with those in the future, because and it specifically comes down to real estate. Because what we're doing essentially is using fixing our short-term funding gaps by making long-term decisions on land. And that's an issue.
One question that we had earlier from the floor was bicycles versus cars. And in Paris and in Stockholm and in many other cities, the government is trying to promote the use of bicycles. In China, there used to be lots of bicycles, now they're all gone. So Huangshi, are you also going to use, Mayor Xie, the same approach to urbanization? You're going to allow the cars to take over the city, like in Beijing, where we can't move anymore? Or do you have another development model for using transportation modes?
黄石其实城市就是这个汽车在中国已经不是什么稀奇的事儿了。你核心的问题是讲这个城镇化过程中啊碰到的利益挑战是什么？我就你这个问题讲，就是城镇化，我从我们这个具体管理的过程中讲啊，就是并不是讲把农民从乡村搬到城里，就是城镇化完成了，不是这个概念。它什么概念？就是农民从这个城里面，从农村到城里面以后。他需要来享受这种城市化的这种福利、这种便利、这种种种的这种国家，因为在中国啊，它从历史上它走过来是一种二元社会，就城里面和农村啊，它这两种的福利待遇体系。所以现在城市化过程中，从政府来讲，面临的一个最大的问题就是公共服务的均等化，怎么能够把这些新进入城市的农民纳入到政府？从医疗、教育、住房
对，这个是有一点像肖所长。
但这话是不能白说的，因为我们面临这么快的速度，这么大量的人口，它需要大量的资金的投入。
所以这也是一个很大的压力对当地的政府。We have one question from the floor here also.
Thank you. My name is Don Carter. I'm director of the Remaking Cities Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. I'd like to make a plea for neighborhoods. This has been a fascinating.
It has to be a short plea, though. We're short of time.
It's a plea and a question. We've heard a lot about technology and kind of 30,000-foot planning, but the neighborhood scale is the building block of cities, the walkability. And some of the images I've seen here about these social housing networks, we're tearing them down in North America. They're building them in China. They're building them in India. And my question is, how do you get down to the scale of walkability? 10 minutes from your house, what is around there? That's the building block. We still have the same legs we had 3,000 years ago.
And your question is,
why aren't they doing that?
So, 谢市长，
这个问题问得很好。这个在黄石这个跟中国的其他城市比啊，是一个中等城市。 什么概念呢？就是在这个经济发展状况上，它既不是最发达的，也不是最落后的。从城市规模上看，也是一个中等城市。我从城的这边开车到城的最东边到最西边，正常情况下20分钟。
还是开车？
开车
不是走路。这位先生问的是走路。
走路10分钟可能到不了，但是我相信在15分钟肯定能到得了。就是还是总体来说是一个相对便利。
所以这个来说明已经有交通堵塞，因为车比那个走路还要慢。
我先回答这个先生的问题。
对，
就是从这个小区的配套上来说，我们考虑到这个问题。从交通、医疗，因为这个社区啊，它将来是跟商店、医院、教育是配套的。你看到刚刚那个小区是很大的，它是一个配套的一个小区。我们并不是，因为我们已经走了很多弯路，走到今天。这个问题我们现在已经必须考虑了。
Jonathan, you made a point earlier about things in China being torn down in 15 to 20 years' time anyways.
Well, yes, but I mean, let's not. The advantage of density is that it is dense, that it is a neighborhood, that it creates or allows for interaction, and the scale should not take away from that. So I think that the point is absolutely correct that neighborhoods are the building block. I think it's recognized, and as James is a presentation around transit. The transit is the key. Metros are the key. So once one creates metros, one can build tall buildings. And Jane Jacobs didn't like tall buildings either, but somehow we have a lot of them in Manhattan. They seem to work pretty well.
James, have you planned for neighborhoods in your planning?
Yes, we do. One of the key ingredients of our model is an integrated planning model, and I didn't have time to get into the urban planning aspects of it, but it's the 1 mile, 1 kilometer district that we're talking about is about a 500-meter walking radius, which is a very walkable neighborhood, and we intend to integrate pedestrian-friendly features and amenities to make this a very accessible on foot and on bicycle. The challenge the gentleman asked about the bicycle, the challenge with bicycle system, implementing that in a citywide scale in China is that that is the challenge. You know, the bikes will not work if it's only a single or a very small area. It has to be a thought-out, integrated, citywide e-bike or biking network, and that is still an evolving process. Some cities are trying to do that. The other challenge, if I may just quickly, is the social aspect of bicycling. Bicycling is seen as a 50s, 60s, 70s mode of transportation.
So we need to change that image.
So we have to change that image.
That's one thing that I also want to touch on. Traveling around in China, it seems that all cities now are starting to look more and more the same. And I know also that the cities are trying to attract very similar kinds of investment. You have huge competition between cities in China. How do you see that going forward? Are cities thinking about positioning themselves as would a company and a product? Are they thinking about their unique sales proposition? What's going to be the selling point for these cities? Who wants to go?
I don't know. I think when I go to the hospital and I look at an incubator room full of 50 babies, sometimes I have a hard time telling them apart. And not to use that analogy over moment, but I mean we're in that stage. This is most Chinese cities have got a large development area sort of stuck onto the side of the existing downtown area, which is 10 to 15 square kilometers long. And yes, it looks similar. I have no doubt that 20, 30 years from now, they will look quite different. And the results will be determined largely by the success of the city's leaders and its population in coming up with exactly a distinctive strategy. So I think they're all very, very clear on that. And that is one of the benefits of the top-down process, is that as long as the top is paying attention, it will force the next level down to compete and to say, okay, so what's new and innovative about you? What's your distinctiveness?
So you think that this is coming, but it's not really in place now?
I think it's hard to say. I think at this stage we have, if you look at Chinese food is one of the world's most diverse cuisines. Every city in China has its own uniquenesses. People who are not from China would not typically notice this. So if you ask a Chinese person, what's different about X and Y, he'll tell you about the food. Then I'll start telling you about the accent.
Will Huangshi have a unique cuisine? 而且你们会有一个独一无二的这个从商业目标的这种定位吗？
你讲的，我理解你的意思是，就是现在中国成千上百的城市的发展的同质化的问题，对吧？是这个问题。这里面问题其实有2个。这同质化的问题呢，一个是文化的同质化，就是看城市，你看这个城市都很像，在这个地方看这个城市是这样， 比如我们到这个看了，现在都是高楼大厦，都汽车堵车，这是一种外在的文化的统治啊。第二个呢，可能就是产业的统治。
是，这是我的问题。所以
你是想问产业的统治？
你们现在有一个定位对黄石吗？跟别的同等规模的城市不一样，在哪儿？
其实我觉得还是有差别的。
你能用一句话来说？
当然可以。就是现在城市的，因为它现在从经济上角度讲，现在你的竞争已经不是单个企业在竞争，是整个区域。就刚才我们这个肖所长说的，是区域在竞争，是你的产业链在竞争。所以它不可能这个区域相同或产业链完全相同。
One last question from the floor.
My question is how you measure the performance of the future city. You talk a lot about GDP. What's about human development in this, or happiness, or something like, which is much more related to human values?
肖所长，你觉得这个我们怎么去衡量城市的领导的成功与否？一句话。
这个
可以这样说。
可以的，对。实际上我们的目标呢，就是让农民工，进得来，住得下，活得好。
然后如何衡量呢？用什么样的硬的指标来衡量这个发展？
比如让进入城市的这个人口，有这个完善的福利和社会保障体系，那么呢，他能够和城市居民一样平等的生活。
Okay, this is a question we can discuss a lot because there are lots of measures in place in Chinese cities. We don't have time to go through all of them today. One last question, though, that I think is very relevant to this audience, and that is, what is the role of foreigners and foreign companies going to be in China's urbanization? If you could all summarize in just one sentence each, what you see the future for foreign corporations and foreign experts in China's development. Who wants to go first?
I think the international factors will be one of the more important factors impacted the design of the city and the culture design and also even the industry design. So there would be much open for this international, the people and the cultural factors.
So creative, innovation, design, arts. Jonathan?
中文来说就是有一个开门政策，有开放政策。今天我们就有开放政策，所以这意思就是说我们要转外面的一些技术，技术是第一个，所以这个不是就是硬件就是软件，所以我们呢基本的外国人出来的好处就是他们带来外来的一些经验，这是基本的一个挑战。
谢市长，黄石会欢迎和吸引外来的这些因素，人才、企业。
当然，这肯定。这个你说用一句话是吧？我就说一句话吧。这个中国的快速发展呢，得益于这个改革和开放。所以我相信呢，这个发展到今天现在这个阶段以后啊，中国的进一步的改革开放政策还会继续，还会更多的吸引和这个使外部世界受益于中国的进一步的改革开放。我觉得合作机会太多。
So an even more open China. James?
There's no question China welcomes investment in technology, capital, services, the whole gamut. I think the challenge for overseas companies in China is to find the right partner and to be on the ground. And I think those two are the key for success for foreign companies in China.
So as long as we do our homework better and get the right partners, we're going to be good in China.
And be on the ground.
And being on the ground.
Do it on remote.
肖所长，您的
这个中国每个城市都在大搞这个基础设施建设，所以用大量的财政资金来搞建设，影响了民生。我想呢，外国的公司可以到中国来，把这个投入到基础设施、城市基础设施中去，而且中国所有的城市都在招商引资。我想呢，这个外国投资者呢到中国会受到非常热烈的欢迎。
So the competition between Chinese cities is not a bad thing for foreign companies.
Can I
Okay, we have to stop now, otherwise they will kill me in the panel. But thank you guys very, very much for your insights on China. We could discuss this forever. Thank you so much for listening to us. Thank you.